December in Arkansas. The air is cold. People are busy planning for the holidays, and the kids are looking forward to a long Christmas break. But one family in particular will have presents under their tree that will never be opened. The innocence of a child's smile from a gift not to be seen. You see, December the 22nd, 1987, a Ronald Simmons would start a murderous rampage that he would carry out not only on his previous co-workers, but his entire family. This left a lot of people wondering why. In this episode, Amy and Stacy dive into the 6-day killing spree known as the worst mass murder in Arkansas history.
Welcome back to the SWADE Pro Show. Again, I have Miss Amy with us. Amy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Hi.
I like your sweater.
Thank you.
It's real festive.
Christmas time.
It's
yes.
a Christmas sweater.
Yes.
I don't have one of those.
Well, at least we're both in red.
Well, so. Of course.
There was a Christmas in Arkansas in 1987. Which happens to be the year I graduated high school. If anybody's out there, how you doing? Anyway. It was 1987, and there was a man named Ronald Simmons, and he lived outside of Russellville in a little area called Prairie Grove, but it was outside Dover, Arkansas, and that kind of thing. Just a little bit outside of Russellville. And I've watched some national news footage on this. It was so funny because they would call it this little Ozark town. And I don't know, I don't think of Russellville as a little Ozark town.
Are they in the Ozarks?
So Ronald Simmons was a man who he was not, I will tell you this, he was not an Arkansan. He moved here from New Mexico. But
his family's from Illinois, right?
Yes, his family's from Chicago. He was born in Chicago. His family's from Chicago, but we can't say he was one of our own, I don't know if that makes a big difference.
I'm sure you know why he moved from New Mexico, right?
I do know why he moved from New Mexico, and but I'll tell you a little bit about him being born in Chicago. Mm-hmm. He was born in Chicago, and his real dad died when he was very young. And his mom married a man. He had a stepfather. He was very unruly in school and everything, so they sent him to military school as a punishment, they thought. Well, he absolutely loved military school, and he thrived there. And after military school, he joined the Navy. And after he did his stint in the Navy, he went and joined the Army. So he loved military life. He fit into it, and it's kind of how he thought the rest of his life.
He was a marksman, didn't he? Wasn't he like a marksman of some kind? He got like
medals and everything.
For marksmanship.
Yes, for marksmanship, and he knew a lot about all kinds of different guns. Right. And his family, thought that would straighten him up, send him to military school, but it really kind of fueled the fire of what he would become, honestly. So he got married to a woman, and her first name is I cannot pronounce her first name very good. It's Bersabe, but her middle name was Rebecca, and everybody called her Rebecca or Becky. And so he married her when he was in the Army, and they actually had like 8 kids together. But he had them really spread out. Like, he had adult children with their own children, and had an 8-year-old at home. So they were really spread out. Right. But they were his and her children. And to kind of put a summary on what happened in New Mexico, he had these children and never, it's, how do I say this? He controlled his family as if they were a military camp. No one did anything without his permission. His wife, his children, nobody. And if they ever did anything, like if they were told to do chores or something and didn't do it, they got severely punished. Oh, goodness. Severe beatings, and that was noted. His wife also couldn't leave the house without him knowing where she was. She didn't have a job or anything like that. He controlled everything. And so in New Mexico, he had some kids that were in high school and some kids that were in elementary, and his oldest daughter, Sheila. His oldest daughter, Sheila, was 17, and her brother, which would have been Ronald Simmons Jr., was also in high school with her, and they called him LG Gene for some reason, but he was a junior. Ronald Gene Simmons was messing around with her for at least a year or so, and said that he needed to teach her about sex, and he needed to show her what was right and what wasn't. And so as he had sex with her, he got her pregnant, and she had to go to school like that. And she didn't say anything, but her brother told the authorities. And so they came to her and asked her, and she said, no, he told the authorities this was my father's baby, and this is what he's been doing to her. And they came and asked her, and she said, no, that's not true, that's not true. And they asked her for months and months until finally she broke down and said, yes, it was true. They were going to pursue him, and the DHS and everything was going to pursue him for child abuse. And for some reason, it kind of fell through the cracks for a while, and then he moved them all.
Right.
And he moved them all from New Mexico to the small little place outside Russellville in Arkansas, where he knew no one and nobody knew them. He actually moved them to such a horrible place. He didn't have a job when he came here, but he had several jobs while he was here. But he moved him to a property that had a home that had been built from 2 mobile homes put together. Now, there was no running water, no indoor plumbing in this home, but there was electricity. So they had an outhouse, and they would also have these big 30-gallon trash cans around the house full of water that they would use for water inside the house. So that was what they moved to when they moved to Arkansas. He worked several jobs in Russellville during the time that he was here, and during that time also his daughter had the baby. The baby girl's name was Sylvia Gale, but eventually Sheila met a man named Dennis McNulty, and he married her. And he was about 10 years older than Sheila. She was only about 24. But he took in Sylvia Gale as his own daughter, and they also had a son together. So that's kind of where they were at the time of 1987. That little family had become a unit. His son, who was Ronald Gene Simmons Jr., he was also grown and had a 3-year-old daughter himself. And at the time, the Simmons had at least, Barbara was his daughter's name. And Barbara had been living with the Simmons because her parents, Gene and his estranged wife, had been having problems. So they were getting back together, but they had been living in the house with Ronald and his wife and their other kids. And at the time, they had 4 of their kids at home that were still their children living at home. He had a son named Billy, who was also in his early 20s, and he had moved out of the house, and he had a wife and a son also. So that gets us to Christmas time, December 22nd. His son, Junior, and his wife, Rebecca, were at home. And there's been several different accounts of this story. So here's because nobody was really there. Nobody can really say exactly who did what, or when. What I think was happening was he had gotten mad at his son, and he had a crowbar, and he was beating his son with a crowbar. And his wife got involved, or he was beating his wife, one or the other. He was beating one of them, and then he started beating them both with a crowbar. And then he ended up shooting both of them. And so then he goes and finds his 3-year-old granddaughter, who her name was Barbara, and he strangled her. Now, I'm going to tell you about several people he strangled, and I want you to remember that every time he strangled one of these children, he would dump their body into these 30-gallon water trash cans that were kept in the house just to make sure they had died. Okay?
That's horrible.
Yeah. But there was these big trash cans full of water all through this house. So... And if you got to remember, this house was shown on TV. The inside of this house was shown. There's a Christmas tree. There's Christmas decorations.
Gifts
Yeah, there's gifts under the tree that were never opened. There's all kinds of things. So because the plan had been that the day after Christmas, their other two sons, their other son and their daughter Sheila were coming with their families to have Christmas dinner. Right. So that was the plan. So it was the only time that all of their children were going to be together ever. The same day, December 22nd, when he kills these three people, he waits by the door for his children to get off the school bus. Now, this was the day of Christmas vacation.
Right.
They had just got out for Christmas vacation.
Right.
He comes to the door. He stands at the door. He waits for him, and he's got a smile on his face, and he tells each of these four children, I have a special present for each of you, but I want to give it to you individually. So the rest of you go wait in the car and turn on Christmas music while I give these presents out to individually. He started with his oldest daughter at the time, Loretta, who was 17, and he took her in the house and strangled and drowned her. And then there was Eddie. He called Eddie in from the car, and he was 14, and he strangled and drowned him. Mary Ann, which her name was spelled a little different. Her name was spelled Marie Ann, but it's pronounced Mary Ann. He called her in, and she was only 11 years old.
Goodness.
And if you can imagine, she's walking in now seeing both of her siblings laying there dead.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, laying there dead at 11 years old. So I would assume that it got quick. He did that quickly then, because she would have been screaming.
Right.
Then he gets Rebecca, the last one, out of the car, and she's 8 years old, and he strangles and drowns her also. So between December 22nd, let me tell you, he takes all of these bodies that he's just killed. He takes them out to a pit that was dug outside because they didn't have running water, so they had an outhouse, a privy. And if you know anything about a privy, you have to dig a pit, and then you usually have to dig a second pit because when one pit gets filled up, you just use the next one.
Right.
So obviously they were digging.
Sorry to interrupt, but supposedly he had the kids dig the pit.
Yes, they did. They dug the pit, and now we don't know what was in his mind, so we don't know if we were just doing general maintenance around the house and we got to dig another privy pit, or if he had this calculated for a long time.
Right.
But they did. The pit was about 5 feet deep, not quite that wide, but 5 feet deep. And he took these bodies, the body count now would have been about 7, and he just threw them one on top of the other inside the pit. With nothing around them, with no plastic or anything around them, because when they did find these bodies, they had to put them in body bags and piece them together that way. Right. So anyway, so that's December 22nd. So then the man goes inside, watches TV, eats dinner.
Yeah, because he's there for a few days.
He's there. He's there from the 22nd of December to the 26th of December.
Right.
So he spent Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, all by himself in that house, knowing what he had done.
Right, with all that.
With all of that. And, here's what he did do. And this is probably his military training. He went out and put barbed wire around the pit, and we think he threw some kind of chemical something on top of it, because he only covered it with about a foot of dirt. Once he got everybody in there, and then put about a foot of dirt over them, so you didn't have to look hard to find them. But he didn't cover them. Well, he did that to keep the animals from coming.
Oh, the animals. Okay.
Yes. So the barbed wire was around it, and then they think he may have poured bleach or some kind of chemical thing over it, just to keep the animals out of it at the time. I guess he realized at that time what his plan was, and that he wouldn't care much after a week or so if the animals got to it. But at that time, he wasn't going to have that.
Gee, thanks for holding them off for a week.
Yeah. Well, it would have made him more uncomfortable if he was in the house and the animals were carrying him down the street or something.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you imagine?
That'd be horrible.
Because that's exactly what would have happened. He was very much out in the woods, out in the rural area.
His switch definitely flipped.
Definitely flipped.
But was it even on in the beginning? You know what I mean? It sounded like he had a troubled life.
You never know. Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
And there was a little pond right by his house, which they did end up dragging this pond at the end of it too, just to see if there was anybody else. But makes you kind of wonder why we didn't put him in the pond. I don't know, but I guess you used what you had. He had the pit, and he used that. So I just keep honestly, this was a very hard one to research because I get very emotionally attached when I'm researching.
Right.
That's why I kind of wanted to make sure we mentioned all their names, because these were people.
Sure.
And so for him to sit there in that house for all that many days through Christmas and everything, eating, watching TV, sleeping.
Right.
And so then December 26th comes, and they do think that Billy and his wife, Renta, I believe is her name, they do believe they came into the house, okay, because they were actually found a lot of their blood and looked like they were shot in the kitchen area. So he let them in the house. There were no dead bodies in there at the time, so he let them in the house. And it says that the wife was shot 7 times, and that you could tell she fought extremely. Right. And so he shot her. He shot his son once. He shot his wife, his son's wife, 7 times. Right. Then he took their 20-month-old, which was his grandson. Right. His name was Trey, Trae, and he strangled him and drowned him again. And so, who knows what he did? I mean, we know what he did with the baby's body eventually, but he probably didn't do anything with it at the moment, because he just covered up these dead bodies with their coats. Right. Because he was still expecting more people. Right. And so
that is so crazy if you think about this. This is just off the rocker, just crazy.
Oh yeah. And so they were supposed to have lunch. So like they had gotten there mid-morning, they think. And then they think closer to noon, his daughter Sheila and her husband Dennis, their 7-year-old girl Sylvia Gale, and their 21-month-old son named Michael showed up. They think that he shot his daughter first, and they think they shot her by the Christmas tree, because they found blood and evidence around the Christmas tree for her. And then they shot her husband Dennis. Then he strangled Sylvia Gale, which was actually his own daughter. Strangled her and drowned her. And then their 20-month-old baby, Michael, he strangled and drowned him. And at that time, he took Trey, the other baby, and Michael, the other baby, and put them both in 2 cars that were on the property, in the back, the trunks of those 2 cars. Yeah, for whatever reason.
I think that when the authorities came, from what I've seen on this and what I found, is that they found that girl underneath the tree where she was shot. And that's when they were just looking for people. They saw that's the person that the detective or the sheriff or whatever said, there's body there, we got a body here. So that's when they went inside.
Yes. Well, yes. There
was like a window left open or something.
There was a window left open. He actually had covered, they said he actually treated his daughter Sheila's body better than anyone else's body. Right. Covered her with a tablecloth and all of this.
Right. But she was laying under the tree.
Yes. And they laid there. That was December 26th. So another 2 days passed with dead bodies in the house. Right. And he's in the house with them until the 28th of December. He had also had a job at a mini mart, which this was a little confusing to me, because the newscaster says, well, on the 28th of December, when he went, one of his stops was that mini mart, they said he had quit his job 2 days earlier. Right. But if he had quit his job 2 days earlier, that means he left the house to go to work with the dead bodies there.
I don't know.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that,
I hadn't found anything that said concrete either way. Either way, I thought it was a couple weeks before, just thinking.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Some of these old newscasts you watch, you can tell they're just saying what they think at the moment. Yeah. And now it's 37 years later. There's a lot of investigation that's been on, but it is interesting to watch how they reported it in the beginning, when there wasn't a lot of investigation. People just assumed stuff. Yeah. So what he did 2 days after, on the 28th.
And you got to think that when those bodies were still there.
Still there.
Where they dropped is where they were.
That's where and he had covered them up with just barely anything.
Goodness gracious.
So on the 28th, he gets in the car and he goes to Walmart, where he buys another gun. So it's not the same gun that he killed everyone else with. It's a new gun.
I'm not for sure. Was it I've seen things that said that it was a shotgun. I've seen things that it was a 22. I don't know what it was.
I think it was a 22.
Pistol.
I'm thinking, yes. I'm thinking at the house was a shotgun because a shotgun was involved too.
Right.
If you look at, there's like a list of weapons somewhere I looked at, and it crowbar, shotgun, 22, and then the water. So they were like all of these is what they. So I believe at home it was a shotgun, but if you look at what he did with the pistol, some of the people that he shot survived, and usually you're not going to survive a shotgun blast.
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand, because when he when where you're heading with it is, I didn't understand why they survived.
Yeah, so
I'm glad they did.
So he goes to Walmart. Yes, he goes to Walmart and he buys a gun. Then he first went to a law office, which at one point or another he did some work at this law office. Okay, and there was a 24-year-old girl there named Kathy Kendrick, and I'm horrible with names, and I really want to respect these people and say their name right. Anyway, she was 24, and she was like a legal assistant, a secretary, and when he had worked there or done some work for them at some point or something, he had made advances towards her, and she had rejected him. So he actually went to kill her. And he did. He shot her and he killed her. Then his next stop, which was like on the other side of town, he went to an oil company looking for the owner. Well, he didn't find the owner, but he did shoot and kill a man named John David Clifton, Chaffin, and they called him JD. But he shot and killed him. He also was like a volunteer fireman. Now, he didn't know that man at all. He just shot him.
That's the piece that's random to me. I don't understand.
He didn't.
He was going to get somebody. He got somebody, and that person had nothing to do with it.
Had nothing to do with it, because he was looking for the man. I believe the man that owned it, his last name was Russell, I think, and he wasn't there.
Well, I mean, you got to think he probably wasn't there because he owned it, and he was probably on vacation.
Yes, 28th, yes. And but in the oil company, he also shot another man who didn't die. Okay, so that's the first person that was wounded that didn't die. Then he went to Sinclair's Mini Mart, which strangely the Mini Mart was owned by Russell also, who owned the oil company.
Right.
But he had worked at the Mini Mart, and this is where they had said he had quit like 2 days before, but maybe he quit weeks at a time. Who knows? So there he shot 2 more people but didn't kill them. And one lady gave her account of it. He shot towards her, and she said that she felt the heat of the bullet crease her hair even. So that's why I don't think it's a shotgun. I think that must have been the pistol. But he didn't hit her. But 2 people were wounded there, and they didn't die. Then he went to Woodline Freight Company, and there he was looking for his former boss, who happened to be a woman. He shot her twice too, but she did not die. And then he told another employee there, "Call the police because I'm done."
Right, that is so weird.
Yeah, and so that tells you there was a plan. It was quite a shock. In 1987, things like this just didn't happen. It wasn't random. I mean, 1987, we hadn't even had a school shooting. There was nothing like that back in 1987, and so this was quite a shock. It was quite a shock. And
the documentary I watched, they were talking about when they would get the first call that there was a shooting, they was heading that way, and and then they got the second call, they were across town. It's like, how does that happen? And then the third call was back kind of towards the west side of Russellville or whatever. They were like, they couldn't get there fast enough.
They said, right. And
I think in Walmart back then, you could still buy firearms. I don't think
definitely.
You can now.
I want to kind of backtrack or kind of unpack. Let's unpack this just a little bit.
Yeah.
Everybody goes, back then they think, well, why? Why would he do this? Well, I will tell you, and if something like this happened now, I think more people would think the way I think of it now, is there was all these rumors. There was rumors that wife was going to leave him. There was rumors that wife wanted to go with the family, when they came, they were going to have dinner, one last dinner, and then she was going to leave him then. There was those rumors. But does someone really kill this many people because their wife's going to leave them? When he's out messing around with his daughter, he's out making advances to the lady at the law firm. You know, it's not like this is the love of his life. This is how I look at it. And we didn't look at things like this in the 80s. But I believe, I will say, he was a narcissistic control person. And it didn't matter really what was happening. He was losing control.
Right.
It was a control thing.
Too.
Yes, it was a control
100%.
thing. And just as he said, I have to teach my daughter about sex, so I have to have sex with her, that's controlling. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you take your family to an isolated place that doesn't have any running water. I believe I read something that said they didn't have a telephone either, they didn't have anything. They had electric. Right. They did have electric because they had TV, but he kept them very isolated in New Mexico and in Arkansas, and there's a lot of people that say that. Nowadays, that's a red flag. It really is. I think people recognize mental illness like that a lot more than we did in the 80s. He was definitely mentally ill. He definitely had no moral compass at all.
No.
Not at all. I mean, no empathy, no moral compass, no anything. Because, there's people that wouldn't kill their dog like this, much less their family. So, but there was a letter that came out I found in the newspaper, which was interesting. If I brought all of it, I did. Okay. This is a newspaper article from the Daily World, Helena, Arkansas, is where it was printed. It was Monday, January 4th, 1988. So you got to think it's just a week after it happened.
Right.
And what happened was...
I had to do fast math there because it was 87. Then the new year
came. So so it's like a week later. And so I research a lot in newspapers, and this of course was all over every little newspaper in Arkansas and of course national newspapers. Right. But this says, and this came from the Affiliated Press in Little Rock. It says, here's a couple of texts of the letter sent by Rebecca Simmons, which is the wife of R. They just put R. Gene Simmons Sr., to her son William, which was Billy. Billy's had little Trey. Her son William and her daughter-in-law Renetta and the grandson Trey Simpson Jr. They lived in Fordyce, Arkansas. So she sends this letter, and part of this letter it was a very sweet letter, and she talks about how Barbara's living with them because her parents, Jean and Wilma, are having trouble, but hopefully they're getting back together. So she says, I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other night, and I would not like to live the rest of my life with your dad. I'm still trying to figure out how to start. But what if I could find a job? You have to remember, I've never had a job. Never had a job. I've been married, or before that, I never had a job either. I know that I have to start somewhere. It would be much easier if I just had a job, but I still have these 3 kids, and she was not counting her 17-year-old Loretta at the time. But she said, I have to take them with me. And she said, so I want to do some checking by telephone. I will go and borrow a telephone from someone to check for a job. And so she put, sometimes I feel like God is telling me to be more patient with Dad, but right now I just say I'm doing some checking, not saying that I've made my decision. And then the letter goes on, and she said she was so proud of their baby boy Trey, and she said the last time you came, Dad wanted to know how you wouldn't come and stay longer, but he wanted to know how long you would stay this time. This was a letter that was sent right up before Christmas. So he may have been thinking, how long y'all going to be here?
Right.
And then she talks about how Barbara is staying with them and how sweet and wonderful Barbara is for her, but that she really wishes she would be with her parents. She said, I've remembered a lot of what you said, Billy. I'm a prisoner here, and the kids are too. I know when I get out, I might need to help, but Dad has me like a prisoner. That the freedom might be hard for me, but yet I know it would be great having my children visit me anytime I want, having a telephone, going shopping, or even going to church. Right. Every time I think of freedom, I want out.
That's sad.
As soon as possible. I'm sorry. See, that gets me.
Yeah, we take things for granted that those people are just wishing for.
That gets me. Yeah, that gets me. And she was obviously a highly abused wife. I mean, if her husband beat her with a crowbar, it's not the first time he ever beat her.
Right.
She said, I don't want to burden anyone with my children, but I need help getting out. And she said, I know it's hard, but I was so afraid, and if I get too afraid, I might go back, and I don't want to go back.
Right.
So she said, give my darling Trace a lot of hugs and kisses from me, and I love y'all very much. Barbara gets bored if I write long letters, so I have to go talk to her. So, oh, thank you. I'm sorry.
You're good.
I'm sorry. I just, and then she says, get this, though. She can't even mail this letter. She says, I don't know when I'll mail this letter because I have to give it to my neighbor, and she'll take it to town when she goes.
Wow.
She can't even mail the letter to her son.
Wow.
That's too much.
It just seems like that I think he was scared that everything was going to get out and everybody.
He did. Yeah.
So that's why he did it. It wasn't that she was not happy. I think he was scared.
Yeah.
He was done.
Well,
but it doesn't make sense because you think about it. In the end, he got the death penalty. He went to prison for 3 years or something.
Yeah, he did. But he was such a coward.
Right.
There's a twist to this that's hard to put together. I mean, I've been trying to research it, but there's a little piece of it everywhere. Back when Sheila admitted in New Mexico that the baby was her dad's, she wrote it out or something. There's some kind of letter that he got that said, we know this is the thing, okay? For some reason, he took that letter and put it in a safety deposit box.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so the comment he made to his daughter is, I can't believe you told I will see you in hell.
Right.
Well, a twist to all this is, and we'll get to the trial here in a minute, but a twist to this is that this letter was found during this whole investigations.
Right.
And the prosecutor read the letter out in the courtroom, and he attacked the prosecutor, grabbed the service pistol of the officer standing there, and tried to kill the prosecutor in the courtroom.
Wow.
Now, these days, if something like that happened, he would have been shot in the head.
Right.
But he wasn't.
I didn't know.
And because that man brought the letter out and read it, and that was like his biggest fear. But he had to write this precious letter and to have it put out in the newspaper after you've been murdered, it's a lot. It's a lot. So I also found that they had Sunday memorial services for the Simpsons slain relatives at the First Assembly of God in Russellville. I've been to that church. And it says a minister read the letter. This letter that I just read from you, read the letter for Rebecca Simpson, and she where she wrote, I always try to remember a man who hates suffers more than the man that he hated. About 250 people attended the service, including about 25 of Mrs. Simpson's survivor and 25 teenagers who were also students at Dover High School with their kids. Wow. So, I mean, this is real. This is real life here. This is not a movie, and I'm so glad it's never been a movie, honestly.
Me too.
But this is real life. These people were really caught in this situation, and I know, just between me and you, we've talked about this story, and I told you this was hard for me. I remember where I was when I heard. I remember where I was with the execution. So back to him calling the police. He said, call the police because I'm done. Well,
Right.
The police came, arrested him, and all they knew is what he had done that day.
Right.
And he didn't say anything.
Right, he didn't.
Okay, again, a coward, complete coward. So he gets to the police and he didn't say anything. And so somebody goes, well, we need to do a welfare check on his family because nobody's heard from him for several days. So they get out to the house, and there's a big metal, they said, unusually large metal door on the front of the house. And they couldn't get in, and it wasn't open. They couldn't get in. So they came in one of the windows. Right. And one of the windows they came in is where they saw that poor lady that had been shot 7 times in the kitchen. And that's who they saw first. And so it took a bit. It took a good bit. It took a long time for them to keep the investigation to find all the bodies.
Right.
Because they didn't even know how many people they're looking for.
Right.
You know, you find everything inside, and then somebody finds this pit outside.
Right.
And so the news coverage that was shown to the nation at Christmas time was just body bags and pictures of these kids from the school yearbook, that kind of thing. But when he was first arrested, before they went out and did this welfare check, they charged him with 2 deaths because they only knew what he did on the 28th, right? And they knew he had killed 2 people. Right. So they charged him with 2 deaths and injuring these other people. So he got charged from that, and that was one trial.
Right.
Okay. But then when they went out to the welfare check and found 14 other people, then that was a whole nother trial. So he was sentenced to death in the first trial, but then he had to go on trial. I don't know why. That doesn't even make any sense why, if you found them within a couple days, because obviously they did, or they wouldn't have known that they were dead in January, you know. So it doesn't make any sense why it's 2 separate trials, but it was. And he was convicted and given the death penalty in both trials. So all of this, of course, takes years. He was in prison, and certain groups tried to get together and that were against the death penalty and tried to lobby for him and everything. And there's a letter that they didn't publish where he put out to people that was just vulgar with all kinds of language and everything awful, saying, do not try to keep me from being killed. Right.
It was going on somewhere. I read that. That if you didn't give me the death penalty, it's cruel and unusual punishment or something.
Cruel and unusual punishment.
Right.
And so everybody says, well, you know, if you did all this, because usually when people do this, they kill themselves, right? Why didn't you kill yourself?
Right.
Here's his lame excuse, complete coward. He said, well, it's hard to shoot yourself, and I was afraid I would not shoot myself enough to kill myself, and I would be a vegetable, and I didn't want to suffer.
Right.
So again, complete coward, complete lack of any empathy, completely focused on himself, completely. And so, but then he goes to prison, and his lawyers... Well, they actually had to take him out of the death row prison population because people were trying to hurt him because they felt, the other death row inmates felt that he was jeopardizing their appeals and their possibility for appeals because he was saying, I don't want to appeal.
Which is kind of weird if you think about it. If you're trying to get off of death row and you go kill somebody, that doesn't really plead your case, does it? No,
but you know... he was not safe. So actually, which I think is a good thing, he was in solitary confinement most of the time he was in jail. Okay, so we get to 1990, and our governor was Governor Bill Clinton at the time. On June 25th, 1990, Ronald Simmons put to death that day at 9 p.m., and Governor Bill Clinton signed his death warrant. And no family member would claim his body. So because no family member would claim his body, he was buried in a pauper's field. So
I'm not for sure. Explain that.
Pauper's field. I actually found somebody have to Google if they want to know exactly where, because I'm going to tell people where to find this man. But it was in that county, and it was Pauper's Field is a field owned by the county, and that usually prisoners are the ones that will bury people in Pauper's Field.
Oh wow!
Yeah, usually they dig the graves and bury the people in Pauper's Field, and that means that you didn't have money to bury yourself,
right?
You know, and so that's where he was buried in 1990. I looked up to, I believe his wife and his oldest son, and maybe their Barbara, the first three that were killed, I believe it's the three of them, they were buried in Colorado for some reason. There's family there or something. And on their grave, it says their names, and it says they were killed in the tragedy and the date and everything, but it also says others that were killed on this date, which are not laid to rest here, and it listed everyone else. So in Colorado, there's a graveyard that has a kind of a memorial to them all. So, but they were buried in different places. But Mrs. Simpson, she had relatives that stepped in and took care of things. Good. But none of his relatives wanted to have anything to do with that.
So. Can't blame them, can you?
No, can't blame them. So that was Christmas 1987. And so do I believe he premeditated it? Absolutely, completely. Do I believe he did it because his wife was going to leave him? I think if we don't dig deeper than that, then we're missing something. Right. And so to dig deeper, I would say he's losing control.
Correct.
Because he didn't care about any of them. That wasn't the thing. It was just that was his kingdom, and they were going to leave it, and he wanted to be in control. To me, it's another show of who he really was. So
I just thought about this. So he let's just say this is all I believe he did plan all this out, premeditative. But he not only the killings, but the execution too.
Yes.
He rushed this along so he wouldn't have to suffer.
Yes.
Which
definitely.
is wrong. I think definitely. They should have delayed. It doesn't matter what he has to say about it. I mean, he's killed 14 people.
Well, and I think I missed this part when he first was arrested in Polk County. And they thought he killed 2 people, went on the killing spree on the 28th, didn't know about everybody else. They sent him to the state hospital in Little Rock.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And he was evaluated. And when he was evaluated, the doctor said he's perfectly sane. He's perfectly sane to stand trial.
I forgot about this part.
Yeah, he's perfectly sane to stand trial. But it was during that time when they went and did the welfare check on the kids. So he did spend some time in the state hospital before he went on to trial, because there was all that they had to go through, because there were so many people saying, well, obviously he's insane. Can't stand trial. Well, he didn't go that route. Yeah. And because
he wanted to get, he wanted to die quicker.
Yes. Well, he also wasn't going to say he was insane, because that means he would be out of control of himself.
And that little stunt he pulled in the court probably helped his case.
Probably helped, yes. And but again, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen now. I mean, if he had grabbed a gun, I think they would have took care of him right there.
Used it on
I
him.
think they would have.
And he may have thought they would have done it then.
He may have thought they would have then, but they didn't, and it went on. And
should have went on longer.
Which is just so crazy.
What is fair in this situation anyway?
Yeah, what is fair? And let me tell you about his 2 lawyers. He had 2 lawyers, and they were state appointed, of course.
Right.
He had both lawyers for both cases. Okay, the same 2 lawyers. One lawyer has since passed away. Another lawyer is still practicing, but not very much, but is a Little Rock lawyer. And I'm not going to say their names either, because they were practicing. They have family.
No problem, right.
But a weird thing was said the day of his execution, because his lawyers were there. And a weird thing was said. They said, well, after it was over, they said to the lawyers, well, why do you think he did it? And they said, well, after talking to him and lawyer, client confidential and all that, we think we know why he did it. But he didn't share that before he was executed, and we don't feel like it's our place to share it.
Right.
So I don't know, whatever. I don't, again, who really cares why he did it?
Well, my deal, it ain't like family's going to sue you because, they haven't stepped up yet.
Yeah. It really was probably for a liability thing. It probably was something, but still
control.
It really doesn't matter. There's not a good reason to do it.
Right, but I still think it's all over control.
It's all under control.
That's why he did it.
It's
That is
all
my
under control.
opinion. My opinion.
I don't know if he really knew that his wife was going to leave. I don't know if he really knew that. I doubt it. But he might have been able to tell. But I doubt that any of his kids would have told on her, because that's just not, they wouldn't have reported something like that. Right. So anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Amy, for coming back.
So that's our Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, everybody. But we're going to make better Christmas memories than that.
Yes, we are.
So.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Amy.
No problem. Thank you so much.